All right, welcome to our lecture talking about language distributions. We're going to look specifically at Europe and Africa. The slides are designed to accompany the book People, Places, and Culture, and I am, of course, Miss Gall, and I'll be your host for the lecture. There we go. So we're going to start out, we're going to talk about Europe, and then we'll lead into and talk a little bit more about Africa. So there's really a handful of major Indo-European languages that we can talk about when we talk about Europe. So if we want to talk about Germanic languages, we see those centered mostly around Germany and areas where German folks either originally came from way back in the day, think like Roman Empire, or expanded into also right around that Roman Empire time frame. Okay, if we look at our Romance languages, those are specifically, as the name implies, related to Rome. So these are ones that were major areas in the Roman Empire oftentimes. So Spain, France, Italy, places like that. Our Slavs, primarily Eastern Europe, Slavic languages, right, and a little bit in the Baltic region. We've also got Celtic languages, which are not as large or as widespread as they used to be, but certainly still exist. A few Baltic languages and some Hellenic languages. Hellenic is, by the way, just another way of saying Greek. And then a few other smaller ones spread out there. So we've got is it Finno-Ugric, I'm going to guess, group, right? We've got certainly Turkish languages. We've got some really weird, funky ones in there that you wouldn't think. So like Thracian or Illyrian languages. Basque is its own unique language that's literally unlike any other language in Europe. So talk a little bit about some of these subfamilies in Europe and talk about, I mentioned already our Romance languages. Again, those descend from Latin, which was the language of the Roman Empire, which is where it gets its name from. Okay, so these are, again, those areas that had high concentrations of Roman populations. France, Italy, Spain, right? And then also to some of them are kind of on the edges. Romania, for example, not really central to the empire, but more towards the edges. Portuguese, also kind of a little bit more on the edges. And these are languages that have a lot in common when we talk about sounds and things because of that Latin connection, but they're not mutually comprehensible. Okay, so somebody who speaks exclusively French can't go to Italy and understand what's going on. And then we've got, along with that, we've also got our Germanic languages, and this covers a lot of the rest of kind of Western or Central Europe, and this is English, German, Danish, Norwegian, Swedish, right? And these really reflect the expansion of peoples going from Northern Europe, so kind of Norway, Swedish, down and then also south. So they're going west and they're going south and spreading out that way. And last but not least, we talk about our really kind of our major language groups are those Slavic languages. So Russian, Polish, Czech, Slovakian, Ukrainian, Slovenian, Serbo-Croatian, Bulgarian, right? And these develop and kind of separate out from where they were at as Slavic people migrate from somewhere near present-day Ukraine down into the rest of Europe and out towards Asia about 2,000 years ago. So we're still all talking in that roughly that same time frame. When we look at the Europe's linguistic and political map, what we can see is that there's a fairly high correlation between languages spoken and the political organization of space. And the reason we see that is that nation-state movement we talked a little bit about in the political geography chapter, where it was important, especially early in the 20th century, to kind of consolidate shared common cultures into national and ultimately state groups. Okay, so there are a few important exceptions. We have some French speakers that live in Belgium, right? That live in Switzerland, that live in Italy, that are native French speakers. There are some German speakers, for example, in Hungary, Hungarian speakers in Slovakia, Romania, and Yugoslavia. It gets, especially when we're looking at Eastern Europe, that's where the map gets particularly messy, right? So Romanian speakers that were born, raised, grew up in Moldova and Greece, Turkish speakers in Bulgaria, right? Albanian speakers in Serbia. One of the really weird, kind of funny exceptions to what we see when we talk about Indo-European language families, right? And the Indo-European language families, by the way, stretch for the most part across Europe and down into Eastern Asia, right? So India and kind of Europe, Indo-European. But one of those big exceptions is the Basque language of kind of that Euskera region, which covers it's a small land area right on the border of Spain and France. Okay, and it's in no way related to any other language family in Europe. So the theory is that this was one of the original languages that was spoken in Europe, and that as people were migrating in, the speakers moved kind of up into the mountains and out towards the coast to get away from those incomers. Take, for example, here just a quick look. We can see some of the graffiti on this wall where they use the English language to talk about freedom, for example, for the Basque country as a way of showing separate support for that Basque separatist movement, which again is something we talked about a little bit. We talked about political geography, right? The Basque region, it's a unique culture, it's a unique language, it's a defined ethnic group, and many of them would like to have their own political entity as well. So next stop, remember I said we'd talk about Europe and then we're going to talk about Africa, is to talk a little bit about the languages in sub-Saharan Africa, right? And there's a few big ones and then a whole bunch of small ones. So we've got, for example, just down at the southern tip there, right? We've got Indo-European, which really is a reference more to whites coming in from Europe. Up towards the north end of Africa, right, we've got that Afro-Asiatic languages, which go really from western, kind of the western Sahel all the way over and through and around the Horn of Africa. Most of the middle of the country is those Niger-Congo languages. There's some spots kind of split in the middle there, mostly in the middle of that Afro-Asiatic, that are Saharan. And you'll notice that's structured mostly around the Sahara Desert, right? We've got a few that are Sudanic. And then last but not least are those Khoisan languages that are mostly in kind of southern Central Africa. And the Niger-Congo language family is really the predominant language family we talk about Africa in terms of speakers who speak languages that come from that language family, but also we talk about just in terms of overall territory and things like that. Arguably the oldest language, by the way, in sub-Saharan Africa are those Khoisan languages, which are the ones that include that funny click sound as part of their talking. And so dig into it a little bit more and we talk about, for instance, Nigeria's got about 141 million people, right? And the data is about 4 years old, so you know it's going to be plus or minus a million or two, potentially. But they speak more than 500 different languages. Okay, and then what they've got, and we're using this as a case study, right? There's 3 prominent languages that are distributed regionally. Hausa in the north is about 35 million people, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing that. Yoruba in the southwest is about 25 million people, and Igbo in the southeast is about 25 million people. So these are pretty evenly distributed when we're talking overall numbers of populations, right? And certainly if the 3 of them were to combine, they'd be not quite a majority, but pretty close. Okay, but the trick is, again, 500 different languages that fall into not just these categories, but others. And so when Nigeria gets its independence in 1962, okay, from England, it adopts English as the official language because the 3 major regional languages that we just talked about, they're too politically charged to use as a national language, because if you use one, then the speakers of the other language families are going to feel discriminated against, and back and forth, right? So like so many former colonial countries, what Nigeria decided to do was adopt English as the language of government, and in that way disenfranchise all equally, as it were. So, oops, that's the wrong way. So, just to kind of wrap up, we talked a little bit about language families, right? We talked about the spread in particular of European languages. We didn't talk so much about the spread of African languages, but certainly if we go back and we look at our map here, we talk about Arabic spreading largely from, not surprisingly, Arabia, right around that Horn of Africa area, up through modern day Ethiopia and Egypt, and spreading west from there, right? Niger-Congo languages, I'm not quite sure where they came from, but if I had to guess, right, that they were probably came over maybe from some of the islands, or developed, perhaps originally started out with that Khoisan and spread out from there and developed and changed and things like that. So if you have any questions, by the way, let me go ahead and finish my summary. We finished up, we talked a little bit about a case study with Africa, because Africa is a special place just because there are so many languages spoken, right? Nigeria certainly is the extreme end of it, but most countries have multiple languages spoken within them. And it's not uncommon to come across people who speak 3, 4, 5, 6 languages over there just because it's kind of the cost of doing business, or the cost of living in a country where it's very multilingual. So if you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to bring them to me in class, and I'd be delighted to do what I can to answer them, and I'll see you the next time we meet.